They said he had a heart made of stone. A billionaire who couldn't walk, couldn't love, and couldn't stand anyone near him. He fired every maid who dared to enter his mansion, until one day, a humble housemaid walked in, and with a single dance, she melted a frozen heart that money could never fix. Ethan Cole was a name that carried power, fear, and mystery. To the world, he was a genius tech billionaire. But inside those golden gates and behind the glass walls of his mansion, he lived like a prisoner, trapped not by bars, but by his wheelchair and his own pain. It had been 5 long years since the accident. One rainy night on a highway had changed everything. His car spun, metal crushed, and in seconds, the man who used to run marathons woke up in a hospital unable to feel his legs. The world called him lucky to be alive, but Ethan called it a curse. After that night, something inside him died. He locked himself away, pushing away everyone who tried to help. Nurses, assistants, maids, no one lasted long. His voice was sharp as a knife. His words could cut deeper than any wound. The staff whispered stories about him, that he once fired a maid just for humming while cleaning. Another said he made a woman cry for putting sugar in his coffee instead of honey. Ethan didn't care. "I pay them to work, not to smile," he'd say coldly, his hands gripping the wheelchair wheels tighter every time someone mentioned pity. And so, people feared him. Until one Monday morning, a young woman named Grace arrived at his door. She was nothing like the others. No expensive makeup, no fake politeness, just simple clothes, a calm smile, and eyes that held quiet strength. She stood outside, clutching her small bag, raindrops glistening in her hair as the butler opened the door. Mr. Dalton, Ethan's longtime assistant, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, this is Grace. She's here for housekeeping. I know you said no new staff this week, but..." Ethan didn't look up from his tablet. "Another one? Fine. Let's see how long she lasts. 2 days? 3. Grace took a small breath and smiled. "I'll do my best, sir." He glanced up briefly, just long enough to notice how her voice didn't shake. That calm tone caught him off guard. But he hit it quickly. "Don't talk too much. Just clean. Don't touch anything that's not yours." Grace nodded gently. "Yes, sir." And she began her work quietly. She dusted shelves, arranged books, wiped tables, all while humming softly under her breath. Her voice was so faint that it blended with the sound of rain outside, but somehow, it filled the empty mansion with life. Ethan noticed it that evening. As he rolled through the hallways, the faint melody reached him. He paused his wheelchair near the stairs and listened. It was peaceful, soothing. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't known in years. But as soon as he realized that, he shook it off and rolled back to his study, his face cold again. The next morning, Ethan called her into the living room. "You missed a spot under the piano. Do you think I pay you to be lazy?" Grace turned toward him with a small nod. "I'll fix it right away, sir." No excuses. No frustration. She knelt down and cleaned carefully until the floor shone like a mirror. Ethan frowned. Most maids would have cried or quit by now. But she didn't. He kept testing her patience. He criticized her cooking, her timing, even the way she folded napkins. Yet every time, she responded the same way, with calm respect. By the 4th day, even Mr. Dalton whispered, "Sir, I think she might actually last." Ethan scoffed. "No one lasts. She'll break eventually." But he was wrong. That night, the storm returned. The sound of thunder echoed through the mansion as Grace stayed late, finishing her chores. Ethan was in his study, staring at the rain through the window when he heard music, an old jazz record playing softly from his speaker. It was one of his favorites, though he hadn't listened to it in years. When he turned around, he froze. Grace was there, standing in the middle of the living room, eyes closed, her feet moving slowly with the rhythm. It wasn't a big dance, just gentle, graceful steps, like her heart was remembering something happy. She looked free, weightless, alive. For a moment, Ethan forgot to breathe. His hands loosened on the wheels. That image, her simple dance in the soft golden light, struck something deep in him. A memory. His mother, long ago, dancing in their kitchen, laughing as she cooked. It was warmth. It was home. Grace suddenly noticed him and gasped. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know you were here. I was just..." But before she could finish, Ethan spoke in a low voice, different this time. "It's fine." Grace blinked, surprised. He looked away quickly, hiding the emotion rising in his chest. Just don't make a habit of it." She nodded shyly and gathered her things to leave. But when she stepped outside into the rain, she smiled to herself. She'd seen something in his eyes, not anger, not disgust, but pain. And behind that pain, a lonely man who'd forgotten how to feel. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The image of her dancing kept replaying in his mind. The way she moved, the quiet confidence in her eyes. For years, his mansion had been filled with silence and bitterness. But tonight, for the first time, it felt alive. He didn't understand why. He didn't want to. But deep down, something had begun to change. And neither of them knew. That dance was only the beginning. Ethan Cole didn't believe in miracles. But that night, as the rain whispered against his window, he found himself staring at the ceiling, replaying that image, Grace dancing in the golden light, free and unafraid. It had been years since something had stirred his heart like that. He tried to shake it off, telling himself she was just another maid, another temporary face who'd soon be gone. But something about her stayed in his thoughts like a melody he couldn't forget. The next morning, when she arrived, he caught himself waiting for the sound of her humming. When he didn't hear it immediately, the mansion felt strangely empty. He frowned at himself. "What are you doing, Ethan?" he muttered, shaking his head. "You don't care about a maid's humming." But he did. Grace came in smiling, carrying fresh flowers from the garden, something no one had done in years. "I found these near the back fence," she said softly. "Thought they might brighten the room a little." Ethan turned his wheelchair toward her, his tone clipped. "This isn't your house. You don't decorate." For a moment, her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir. I just thought." He sighed, seeing the hurt flicker in her eyes. "Leave them," he said suddenly. "Just don't do it again without asking." She smiled again, just a little. "Yes, sir." And that tiny smile, that forgiving, gentle smile, twisted something inside him. He'd yelled, and she smiled anyway. She didn't fight, didn't walk away. She simply understood. No one had done that for him in years. Over the next few days, Ethan began noticing things he hadn't before. Grace worked quietly, but with purpose. She sang softly while folding laundry, talked kindly to the gardener, even fed the birds that landed near the kitchen window. Her presence made the air lighter somehow. And for the first time, Ethan began to speak to her, not as an employer, but as a person. "Why do you hum all the time?" he asked one afternoon, rolling his chair into the hallway. Grace looked up from dusting. "Music helps me think," she said. "When I hum, I remember good things." "Good things," he repeated bitterly. "Must be nice to have some." She glanced at him with quiet empathy. "Everyone has at least one, sir. Sometimes we just forget where to look." He turned away, pretending her words didn't hit him. But they did. Hard. Later that evening, as he scrolled through old emails on his tablet, he found an old picture. Himself before the accident, smiling with friends, standing tall. He stared at it for a long time, then turned the screen off, his chest heavy. Days turned into weeks. Grace was still there, not fired, not broken. She had lasted longer than anyone. Even Mr. Dalton noticed. "Sir, she's been here almost 3 weeks now. That's a record." Ethan didn't reply, but he felt a strange sense of pride he didn't want to admit. One afternoon, while cleaning the upper hallway, Grace noticed a large covered frame leaning against the wall. She gently lifted the cloth and froze. It was a portrait of a woman in a red dress, smiling beautifully. The name on the bottom read, Elena, Ethan's ex-fiancée. Grace quickly covered it back, but Ethan had already seen her. His voice came from behind, cold and sharp. "Don't touch that." "I'm sorry, sir," she said, turning around. "I didn't mean to. I said don't touch it," he snapped, his tone filled with the old rage that had been buried for weeks. His wheelchair spun slightly as he turned away, his hands trembling. "Just get out." Grace hesitated, then whispered softly. "You still love her, don't you?" Ethan froze. He hadn't heard that name spoken in years. He wanted to yell. He wanted to tell her to shut up. But when he turned to face her, he saw no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. "I'm sorry," she continued. "I shouldn't have said that. I just saw the way you looked at her picture." He exhaled slowly, the anger leaving as quickly as it came. "She left me," he said finally. His voice was low, almost broken. Said she couldn't handle being with someone who'd never walk again. So she found someone who could. Grace's eyes softened. "Then she didn't deserve you, sir." He looked at her sharply. "You don't even know me." "I know pain when I see it," she said quietly. And I know what it's like to be left behind. That last sentence caught his attention. Someone left you too? Grace looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. My husband, she whispered. He passed away 3 years ago. Car accident. I lost everything. My home, my job. I took cleaning work to survive. Ethan felt a pang of guilt in his chest. The woman he had treated so harshly had been through her own storm, maybe worse than his. I'm sorry, he said, surprising even himself. Grace smiled faintly. It's okay, sir. Life breaks us all in different ways. But sometimes, the broken pieces fit together again, just not the way we expect. That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her words. Broken pieces fit together again. He rolled himself to the living room, staring at the piano that had gathered dust for years. Grace had cleaned it the week before, even polished the keys though no one played it anymore. He remembered his mother's laughter, his own fingers once gliding over those same keys. Slowly, with shaking hands, he touched one key. It rang softly through the room. The next morning, Grace walked in and found him there, his fingers resting on the piano. I didn't know you played, she said, surprised. I used to, he replied. Before everything. You still can, she said with a smile. Music doesn't care if we're standing or sitting. Her words warmed him in a way nothing else had. He didn't reply, but that night, the soft sound of piano music filled the mansion again. Uneven at first, hesitant, but real. Grace stood quietly in the hallway, smiling to herself. For the first time in 5 years, the man who had fired everyone else was letting someone in. And neither of them realized. Fate was about to test that fragile piece. Something inside Ethan had begun to thaw. The walls he'd built for years were slowly cracking, piece by piece, under Grace's quiet warmth. The mansion that once felt like a frozen palace now carried a heartbeat, the sound of music, laughter, and something he thought he'd never feel again, peace. Every morning, he found himself looking forward to hearing her footsteps echo down the hallway, her gentle voice greeting him. Good morning, Mr. Cole. And every evening, he'd secretly wait to see her dancing shadow as she worked, her quiet humming filling the air. Ethan still pretended to be strict, but Grace could see through it. When he complained about his soup being too salty, she simply smiled and said, Then I'll make it sweet tomorrow. When he scolded her for moving his books, she replied softly, Maybe I was trying to make the room smile a little, sir. He didn't say it out loud, but he had started smiling too, just a little. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Ethan was in the garden for the first time in years. Grace had convinced him to come outside, saying, The air will remind you that life is still happening, even when we stop watching. He finally agreed, and now, as he sat in his wheelchair surrounded by golden light, he felt something unfamiliar, comfort. Grace was trimming flowers beside him when he suddenly said, You know, you're the first person who's lasted here longer than a month. She laughed softly. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Maybe, he said, glancing at her. Or maybe you're different. Grace paused, her eyes meeting his. Different isn't always easy, Mr. Cole. Neither is caring, he replied quietly. They shared a silence that said more than words ever could. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't just grateful for her presence. He needed it. But something about Grace still felt like a mystery. She was kind, but there was sadness in her eyes. A deep sorrow she carried like a shadow. Ethan noticed it when she thought no one was watching. The way she looked at the piano, or how she lingered near the window whenever it rained. One night, curiosity won. He found her in the living room after hours, sitting by the piano, her hand resting on the keys. The light from the chandelier glowed softly over her face. You play? Ethan asked, rolling closer. Grace startled slightly, then smiled. A little. My husband used to teach me. He said music heals what words can't. Ethan tilted his head. He was a musician? Not exactly, she said. He was a dancer. We used to perform together when we were younger. After he passed, I just couldn't dance anymore. Her voice trembled slightly, and Ethan felt a tug in his chest. So that's why you danced that night, he said slowly. When you thought no one was watching. Grace nodded. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was just remembering him. For a moment, silence filled the room. Gentle, painful, real. Ethan took a deep breath. I know what it's like to lose someone. Feels like the world keeps moving and you're stuck in one place, watching it disappear. Grace looked at him, tears glimmering. Yes, sir. That's exactly what it feels like. That night, their pain became a bridge. Two broken souls who had lost everything. One trapped in a chair, the other trapped in memories, slowly finding pieces of themselves again. Days passed, and Ethan's change became visible. He laughed with the staff, thanked the gardener, even apologized once when he lost his temper. The mansion wasn't silent anymore. It was alive. One afternoon, Mr. Dalton whispered, "Sir, I've never seen you like this. You seem happier." Ethan smirked slightly. "Don't tell anyone." But happiness never comes without a test. One evening, while Grace was cleaning the study, Ethan received a call from his lawyer. "Mr. Cole," the voice said, "there's a woman claiming to be your fiancée, Miss Elena. She's been trying to reach you." Ethan froze. His heart pounded. "Elena? After all these years? What does she want?" he asked coldly. "She says she made a mistake leaving you. She wants to see you." Ethan's stomach twisted. The woman who had shattered his world was suddenly back, just when he'd started to heal. Grace walked in just then, cheerful as always. "Mr. Cole, dinner is ready." But she saw his pale face and stopped. "Are you okay?" He looked at her for a long moment, torn between the past and the present. "Just an old ghost," he said quietly. The next morning, Elena came. She walked into the mansion like she still owned it. Tall, elegant, perfectly polished. Grace greeted her politely, unaware of who she really was. When Ethan saw Elena, his heart clenched. She smiled as if nothing had happened. "Ethan, you look well," she said. "I can't say the same about your timing," he replied coldly. Elena sighed dramatically. "I made a mistake. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle your accident. But I never stopped caring about you." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You left me when I needed you the most." Grace stood quietly in the corner, not daring to interrupt, though her heart ached seeing the pain in his eyes. Elena continued, "I want to start over. I miss our life together." Ethan said nothing for a long time. Then his eyes shifted to Grace, standing there with quiet strength, her hands folded, her presence calm. And for the first time, he realized something powerful. He didn't miss Elena anymore. He missed who he used to be. "I'm sorry, Elena," he said finally. "But that part of my life is over." Elena's expression turned cold. "Over? For her?" she snapped, glaring at Grace. "She's just a maid, Ethan. You can't be serious." Grace's eyes widened, hurt flashing across her face. But before she could leave, Ethan's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Don't you dare talk about her that way," he said firmly. "She's the only person who ever cared without wanting something in return." For the first time in years, Ethan's voice carried warmth. Not anger, not bitterness, but truth. Elena's face twisted with jealousy. "You'll regret this," she spat before storming out. When the door closed, silence filled the room. Grace turned to him softly. "You didn't have to defend me like that." Ethan looked up at her. "You're wrong." "I did." Their eyes met, and in that silent gaze, something unspoken passed between them. That night, Ethan wheeled himself to the piano again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Grace sat beside him, and together, they played, her fingers light, his steady. The mansion that once echoed with anger now trembled with music and peace. But fate wasn't done testing them yet. Because soon, something from Grace's past was about to return, something that could destroy everything they'd built. The days after Elena's visit were strangely quiet. The air in the mansion felt heavier, not with anger, but with tension neither Ethan nor Grace could explain. The storm outside seemed to have moved into their hearts. Ethan was lost in thought most of the time. He couldn't stop replaying the moment Elena called Grace just a maid. It burned in his chest, because deep down, he knew Grace was so much more than that. She was the reason his world had light again. But Grace had grown distant since that day. She still smiled, still worked, but there was something behind her eyes. Worry, maybe guilt. Ethan noticed it every time she tried to avoid his gaze. One evening, as he sat by the piano, he said softly, "You've been quiet lately." Grace hesitated. "I didn't mean to be. Just thinking." "About what?" She gave a faint smile. "About how fast things change. How people come and go." He looked at her for a long moment. "Are you thinking of leaving?" Her eyes widened. "No, sir. I would never." She stopped mid-sentence, her hands trembling. "I just mean, sometimes life doesn't ask before taking things away." Ethan's chest tightened. "Grace, if you ever want to leave, I won't stop you." But don't disappear without saying goodbye." She looked down, tears forming in her eyes. "I promise, sir." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She stood at her small window in the servants' quarters, staring at the rain. Her past, the one she'd tried so hard to bury, was catching up to her, and she knew she couldn't hide it forever. The next morning, as she arrived for work, two men in suits were waiting near the gate. They looked serious, their eyes cold. "Grace Miller," one of them said. "Yes," she replied, confused. "You're under investigation for an outstanding debt linked to your late husband's business. You're required to report to the city office tomorrow morning." Grace froze. "No, that can't be. My husband, he handled all that." "I didn't even." But the men handed her papers and walked away, leaving her trembling. The past she thought she'd escaped had found her again. That night, Ethan noticed she didn't hum. She didn't even look at the piano. Her hands shook as she poured his tea. "Grace, what's wrong?" he asked gently. "Nothing, sir," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But Ethan wasn't convinced. Later, when she left for the night, he saw the papers she'd accidentally dropped on the table. His eyes widened as he read the words. "Debt collection notice. $120,000 due immediately." He couldn't believe it. Grace, the woman who worked tirelessly to keep his mansion spotless, was drowning in debt, all because of a man who was no longer alive. The next morning, he confronted her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Grace looked terrified. "Sir, it's personal. I didn't want you to think I came here for money." "I don't think that," Ethan said firmly. "You've done more for me than anyone else ever has." She shook her head. "You don't understand. They're threatening to take everything. I don't have the money, and I can't go to court again." "I can't." "Again?" he asked, confused. Tears filled her eyes. "My husband's company went bankrupt before he died. They said I signed the papers, but I didn't even know what they were. I was blamed for everything. I've been running from that mistake ever since." Ethan's heart ached. He reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. "Grace, you don't have to run anymore." Her voice broke. "You can't fix this, sir. Some things are beyond saving." "Not this," he said firmly. "Not you." But Grace stepped back, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, Mr. Cole, don't get involved. You've already done too much. I can't let you risk your name for me." Before he could stop her, she turned and walked away, her small figure disappearing down the marble hall, leaving behind a silence that cut deeper than any words. That night, Ethan sat in his study alone. The rain pounded against the windows. Every part of him wanted to chase after her, to tell her she wasn't alone. But the voice in his head, the one that had ruled him for years, whispered, "You can't even stand up. How can you help her?" He slammed his fist against the wheelchair armrest, his voice cracking. "No, not this time." He called Mr. Dalton and said, "Find out everything about her case." Now, by morning, he had the full story. Grace's husband had borrowed heavily to start a small dance academy. When the business collapsed, the bank went after Grace, making her responsible for the loans. She'd spent the last few years working odd jobs just to stay afloat, constantly chased by collectors. Ethan's chest burned with anger. How could someone so good, so kind, suffer this much? He made a decision. The next day, Grace arrived, pale and tired. "Sir, I came to say goodbye," she said softly. "They're taking me to court tomorrow. I have to leave town." Ethan wheeled closer, his eyes steady. "You're not going anywhere." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" He handed her an envelope. "Your debt. Paid in full." Her eyes widened. "What? No. You can't. I can. And I already did." Tears fell from her eyes as she shook her head. "Why would you do that for me?" Ethan's voice softened. "Because you saved me, Grace. You just didn't know it." She covered her mouth, crying silently. "I can't repay you for this." "You already have," he said gently. "You gave me back my life." Grace fell to her knees beside his wheelchair, her hand clutching his. "I don't know what to say." He smiled faintly. "Say you'll stay?" She nodded through her tears. "I'll stay." But fate had one more cruel twist to play. That night, as lightning flashed across the sky, a loud crash echoed through the mansion. Grace ran to the study and found Ethan collapsed on the floor beside his wheelchair. "Mr. Cole," she cried, rushing to his side. His face was pale, his breathing weak. "Please, somebody help." Mr. Dalton called for an ambulance, but Ethan's voice was faint. "Grace, don't cry. Please, hold on," she whispered, clutching his hand. He smiled weakly. I told you, you made the house smile again. As paramedics carried him away, tears streamed down her face. The man who had once fired every maid had finally learned to love, and now she was terrified of losing him. The hospital corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. The beeping of machines echoed softly as Grace sat beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand tightly. Tubes ran from his arm, monitors blinked above him, but his face, even pale and weak, looked peaceful. She hadn't left his side since the ambulance arrived. Her once steady hands now trembled as she brushed his hair back. You can't leave me like this, she whispered. Not after you taught me how to believe again. The doctors had said his heart had gone into shock from stress. He would recover, but only if he had the will to fight. Grace prayed every minute that he would. For 3 days, Ethan lay unconscious. Mr. Dalton visited, leaving flowers and updates from the mansion, but Grace never moved from that chair. Every few hours, she whispered stories to him about her childhood, her dreams, her favorite songs. On the 4th morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, she whispered, "Remember what you told me? That I made this house smile again. Well, you made me believe I could smile too." A faint sound made her stop. Ethan's fingers twitched. Her eyes widened. Ethan, his eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in days, his voice, weak but real, filled the room. "Grace," she gasped, tears spilling instantly. "You're awake." "Thank God." He blinked slowly, looking at her tear-streaked face. "You've been crying." She laughed through the tears. "Only a little. You scared me half to death." He managed a small smile. "Guess I just wanted to make sure you'd stay." She laughed again, wiping her eyes. "You don't have to collapse to get my attention." They both sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels like peace. Then Ethan said softly, "Grace, when I fell that night, I thought it was the end. But even then, I could hear your voice. You were the reason I came back." Grace's heart swelled. "You gave me hope, Mr. Cole. It was only fair I gave some back." Over the next few weeks, Ethan recovered slowly. With therapy and Grace's constant encouragement, he began to move his hands again, then his arms. Every little progress made her cheer like a child. One afternoon, he asked the nurse to remove the blinds. The sunlight streamed in, bright and warm. "I want to see the world again," he said quietly. Grace smiled. "Then let's start with the garden." They went back to the mansion together. The first thing Ethan noticed was the laughter of the staff, something that had never existed before Grace came. She had transformed his home from a cold museum into a living, breathing place of warmth. That evening, as he sat by the piano, Grace walked in wearing a simple white dress, the same one she'd worn during her first dance. She looked nervous but radiant. He tilted his head. "What's this?" She smiled. "You once told me you never got to finish watching me dance. I thought tonight we could fix that." The lights dimmed. A soft melody filled the room, the same one she had hummed months ago. Grace began to move, her bare feet gliding across the polished floor. Each turn, each step, was filled with emotion, not just grace, but gratitude. Ethan watched silently, his eyes glistening. It wasn't just a dance anymore. It was her story, the pain, the loss, the courage to keep moving even when life broke her spirit. As she twirled, the sunlight caught her hair, and for a moment, Ethan felt as if the entire room was alive again. When the music ended, she stood before him, breathing softly, her eyes locked with his. He whispered, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She smiled shyly. "It's the least I could do for the man who gave me back my dreams." He hesitated, then said softly, "Grace, I don't want to go back to who I was before you came here. I don't want to live in silence anymore." Her voice trembled. "You don't have to." He reached out his hand. "Then don't leave. Not as my maid, but as my friend. Maybe even something more, if you'd let me." Grace's eyes widened, tears sparkling under the chandelier. She took his hand gently. "I thought you'd never ask." They both laughed, not out of joy alone, but relief. After years of loneliness and guilt, they had found something pure and rare, a second chance at life. Months passed. The mansion was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It became a place of hope. Ethan's physical therapy continued, and one spring morning, something extraordinary happened. Grace was tending to the garden when she heard a familiar sound, the soft creak of wheels. She turned, expecting to see Ethan in his chair, but he wasn't sitting. He was standing, leaning on a cane, shaky but smiling. "Ethan," she gasped, running toward him. "You're standing." He laughed weakly. "I told you, your dance changed everything." She covered her mouth, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "You did it." "No," he said softly, looking into her eyes. "We did it." He took a slow, uncertain step forward, then another, until he stood right in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind through the flowers. Then Ethan whispered, "Dance with me." Grace blinked in disbelief. Now, now," he said, smiling. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Together, they moved slowly, awkward at first, then more gracefully. It wasn't a perfect dance, but it was real, fragile, and full of love. As they turned beneath the soft sunlight, it felt as if time itself stopped to watch. The billionaire who once fired every maid was now dancing, not with a servant, but with the woman who had saved his soul. When the music ended, Ethan whispered, "Grace, you didn't just make the mansion smile again. You made me live again." She smiled through her tears. "And you made me believe love can heal anything." The camera could almost freeze there. Two people, broken in different ways, finding wholeness in each other's arms. The world outside might see a billionaire and a maid, but in that moment, they were just two hearts finally at peace. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more powerful stories that prove love can change everything. See you in the next one.